Welcome again to another episode of the Southwest Climate Podcast, the March edition. Doing Mike Crimmins.
Hey, Zach.
How you doing?
Good.
Take 3?
Take 4, baby.
Okay.
Let's do it. Let's take the first one, right? I thought the first one was fine.
How you been?
I'm good.
It's been a month and a half.
It's been a month and a half.
So our last episode, I believe, was at the end of January.
Right before you went on your ski adventure.
That's right.
To the wrong place.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Yeah.
It was the right place in any other winter and the wrong place in this winter.
Exactly.
So that means it was
I'm going to
good.
keep working in my best winter since last winter. I'm going to say that as many times
but
as
I
can during this podcast.
We have a lot to unpack. It's been
do.
6 weeks. Most notably, February was pretty raucous.
It was.
One of the wettest and wooliest Februaries in recent memory.
Yep.
So
Groundhog did see its shadow.
Did the groundhog?
Yeah, we'll work that in too. Yeah. Rodent meteorology. I'm totally into it.
How does that compare to climatology?
To climatology. So if the Puxtani Phil sees his shadow, spring it around the corner.
Oh.
Wrong. Totally wrong in the east so far.
Well, let's hope. I'm kind of hoping it's right in the west.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You're done? You done with winter? You've had enough?
Well, the other thing that we want to talk about, and the reason I may be done with winter, is because it was also a fairly cold February.
Yeah.
Actually cold January, February. So we'll unpack that. So let's talk a little bit about recent conditions, touching upon precipitation, temperature. Let's unpack that a little bit, and snowpack, of course. And then we'll move along and think about future conditions. So kind of our normal script, Mike. What do you think?
It sounds good to me. It's got all those key variables in there.
All right. There's 2 big stories in my mind. One of them is that so far this winter has been the complete juxtaposition to last winter. I'd call this winter, from a macro perspective, across the West, including Arizona, it's been a really good, wet, and by good, I mean, I'm largely talking about rain and snow, whereas last winter was the opposite. So that's one big story.
Yeah, I agree.
And then the other story is February. For Arizona, February comes in as the 5th wettest on record, averaged across the entire state. And then if we want to hone in to our neck of the woods here in Tucson was the 4th wettest since 1950. So what the heck happened in February?
When you start looking at some of the precip maps across the entire West, what is striking to me is from the southern border to the northern border, we ended up having above average precipitation. We'll have some of the years where the jet stream will get stuck and we start to get these extremes stack up. And often when El Niño runs its normal teleconnection, the Southwest is getting wet while the far Northwest is actually going dry, and vice versa. But it's only if you go to the far extreme Pacific Northwest and again, they get hundreds of inches a year. You miss a couple inches, you start getting below average. I'm not that impressed.
I don't know about the climatology up there or the
Exactly.
impacts too much, but does
I get
5-inch
it's important
precipitation deficit matter when you're getting
Yeah. Hopefully nobody up there is listening to this, so when we start ragging on that. But again, that point of, from the Northern Rockies, and looking at sort of February values in particular, is that, we're going from north to south and east to west primarily to just about the Rockies. And then on the Continental Divide, as you go towards the east side of the Continental Divide, it does dry out a little bit. In Wyoming and New Mexico has not been sharing in all the love for the Southwest winter. But it's just been above average with some record wet conditions, in parts of Oregon, Nevada, and then even parts of Arizona have seen record wet conditions for February as well. So
this is for February, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at the West, there are just 3 pockets of below average.
Yeah, and they're not record. There's some real small areas of record driest, and they might even be sort of data issues. But even in those locations, it's just hanging out below average, just a bit below, but not any widespread areas of missing out on winter precipitation.
Right, and so if we had this map last winter, it would almost be the opposite.
Yeah, it was ugly. I don't even want to bring it up. Okay. I don't want that in my – I don't want to see it now.
We have to put – this is what we do. We put these conditions in the long-term context.
Right. I don't have the emotional capacity to revisit years like last year.
Okay, so one of those pockets is New Mexico.
Right.
Most of New Mexico, actually. And looking at just February, much of New Mexico, with the exception of the Four Corners area, has seen 50% or less precipitation for February. And the other pocket has been up in Wyoming for the most part, on the drier side of the Tetons and the Rockies. And then, as you mentioned, the Pacific Northwest, and then obviously, as you mentioned, everywhere in between is greater than basically 150% of average.
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing. February was incredible,
right?
And it wasn't just as you were pointing this out. It wasn't just here in the West. I mean, was it February that came in as the wettest?
It's actually December, January, February. The winter as a whole, the meteorological winter, is the wettest on record for
the entire
the United States. Yeah. And you're seeing drought monitor reflecting a very low percentage of the country being covered by conditions of drought that are consistent with that record wet conditions.
What was the sort of large-scale pattern that produced this?
Yeah, so across the West, we've had this discussion since December, and we'll talk about our predictions and how they came up with Tucson rainfall. I'm reluctant to even bring that up, but we'll have to talk about that, I suppose, at some point.
February
is
torpedoed
a problem.
Both of us. Yeah.
February became a problem. But I sitting in December, what did we have to work with when we were looking at the rest of the winter? We had El Niño, in name only, where it was sort of hanging out in the background, right? Mm-hmm. And that was about it. We didn't really have anything else to work with.
We had climatology to go on.
And
I sort of hugged climatology.
I was a little bullish on that, expecting this to be a little more fun than last year. And it turned out it was great. It's been a great winter. The jet stream pattern has been extremely active. We've had a lot of different moving parts across the northern hemisphere and then across the equatorial Pacific. Things like hemispheric changes in the jet stream across the Pacific Ocean, things like the Madden-Julian oscillation, some other sort of higher frequency waves scooting across the Pacific, tons of moisture across the Pacific Ocean from the date line stretching towards the west. So there's just great precipitable water as that metric of moisture just hanging out at our beck and call in the East Pacific. And so as the jet stream was active and it extended across the Pacific Ocean, the subtropical jet especially, strengthening and kind of weakening and strengthening and weakening, those troughs of low pressure.
Did it split? Was it a split?
It was a split. So
that's a classic El Niño.
Yeah, it did. It did. It had these, it looked like El Niño from time to time in that kind of classic jet stream. And we did end up having some split, but we also had the mid-latitude jet sync up and drop down and give us that access to cold air. And that was kind of interesting about February, is that in Arizona in particular, and New Mexico did miss out on a lot of this, is that we ended up having really good cold events and then also these really warm, wet events that were tapping into record amounts of precipitable water that then were driving these, crazy precip rates just by orographic lifting. The onshore flow streaming into California, getting thrown up the mountains and then raining out and snowing out there. But we had the same thing in the Mogollon Rim down here in Arizona. And then we ended up having a more inland system with a lot of cold air and not a lot of moisture, but ended up being that really efficient snow producer on February 22nd, where we ended up getting, I think, 2 inches officially at the airport down here in Tucson.
Right, because if my memory serves me correctly, there was sort of a mix between these storms that were tapping subtropical moisture and storms that weren't.
It wasn't the same thing over and over again. And that it's like even since late December, we've had just all sorts of different kinds of storms come through here. And the jet stream pattern being able to deliver, rain and snow to the northern Rockies to the southern Rockies is just fantastic. I mean, as far as a western winter, this is the way you want to do it.
Well, yeah, what was surprising to me, and going back to the beginning of February when I was deciding, when you were helping me decide where we should go skiing. And
where did I tell you to go?
Yeah, for the record.
Because I didn't have to spend a dime on this trip. Right, I thought you should just helicopter into Tahoe.
Yeah, this was a really fun exercise. So we had a week to pull the trigger on where to go skiing across the West, and we had a week lead time. And the models were bouncing all around between. It looked like it was going to be good. We had out of January, there was a ridge at the end of January, but it looked like it was going to break down. And so it was like, well, is it farther north in like the Northern Rockies and Montana, or is it the Sierras? And to your credit, you're like, you should go to the Sierras. And man, the Sierras
I didn't even to lose at that point.
Yeah, the Sierras got pummeled.
The models kept trying to push that ridge in. And we've been so abused by ridging. Basically over the last couple winters.
Flogged by the ridge?
Yeah, exactly. The ridge would build in. And so when you'd see it on the models, you'd think, like, the ridge is going to win.
Oh, it's here. It's here again.
Totally here. The ridge hasn't been able to win at all. And it's been really shallow. When we've gotten any ridging so far this winter in the West, it's been beat down by a trough coming in from the West.
But what was incredibly impressive about that storm around February 2nd to February 3rd was that not only did it dump copious amounts of snow in the Sierras, it also came south.
Yeah.
Hit Tucson. And the same event also extended all the way up to where we were in Montana. So almost the entire West was covered by that one event. That seemed pretty striking to me.
Pretty awesome, man. Yeah, and if you look across the last 30 days, especially, we've had a couple of events where you've ended up having precip from Arizona all the way up into Montana. And it's just this big, broad onshore flow, troughiness, the forcing mechanisms, and then that copious moisture that's been able to tap into in the Pacific. So it just seems like all the right ingredients have aligned to give the West this great winter.
Looking back at February, there was that early February event, February 2nd, February 3rd, February 4th. Then there was mid-February. I'm thinking about like the major events here.
Yeah.
There was like the 14th and 15th, which slammed the Sierras and also here in the Southwest, actually the entire West. And then there was maybe a more sort of southerly storm on the 22nd and 23rd. That's the one that brought us snow. Those first two were tapping more of the subtropical, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the latter was what was the character of the storm that brought us snow?
Most of the storm systems that have come through the West for February have been drawing on deeper subtropical moisture out of the East Pacific. And it has had to do with a real broad trough of low pressure kind of off the West Coast that's sort of parked up. It wasn't until the later part of the month that there was some ridging that came into the East Pacific and the trough set up more inland. And at that point, it's shut off from that subtropical moisture. And so then that moisture ends up either coming with the storm as it becomes dropping out of the Pacific Northwest or the Gulf of Alaska Pacific Northwest. And then sometimes it can tap into a little bit of moisture hanging out to the south. And that's basically what we had on the kind of the 21st, 22nd storm that came in here, was that the storm system was able to be cold enough because it had that inland trajectory. It wasn't crashing in from warm water off the Pacific. And there was just a little bit of moisture just to the south. So it was that kind of perfect timing. And then it was interesting. I was actually in New Mexico for that storm when it was raining and snowing here in Tucson. And it just kicked up dust over there and it was just the approach of it. And then the tap of that moisture, it fell apart as the storm progressed east. It just got shut off and then it was done. It didn't do anything.
What was really interesting about that storm was that the temperatures like crashed around like 7 a.m.
Yeah.
I mean, it was warmer. It was like in the low 40s until 7 a.m. And then an incursion of really cold air came in and then the snow started. Big flakes, like moist snow, obviously.
Yeah.
At my house, there was no accumulation, but I think you just had to go up 400 or 500 feet. And then I know parts of Gates Pass were covered in a little bit of snow. There was flakes falling for like 5 or 6 hours.
I remember I had to live vicariously through my home webcam. That's what I was sadly doing, was refreshing it, watching the snowflakes fall. And it was that same thing of... Wait a
second. You didn't have anything better to do?
Well, I was on vacation with my family. It was kind of sad that I was so preoccupied with checking the weather back home where, we were supposed to be out enjoying the outdoors. Okay, so it hadn't started snowing at 7 a.m. And usually in Arizona, in February, you're done, right? You're usually the temp's usually going to climb, and that was what was so surprising about it. And it was modeled really
during
well.
the day.
Yeah, I mean, the sun had come up, and you'd expect that the temps are going to start to come back up, but and it was well modeled by the U of A WRF model. Mike Leuthold had written a blog entry on that about expecting that switch over to happen in the morning, and boom, it was like 7 a.m. It just starts snowing, and you're like, it's not going to last more than an hour. It was like 2 p.m. It was still snowing, right? Yeah. I mean, it was just tailing off there at that point, and so it seemed like there could have been some dynamical cooling, evaporative cooling going on at that point with the dry air sort of moving in and the system working its way through. It could have been advection. I think it was well specified in the model. I'm not exactly sure what was going on dynamically there, but really impressive event, for that time of year.
Well, you said it was sort of moisture starved, but which might be technically true.
I think I should say, we were getting precipitable waters of like 1.5 inches earlier in the month. It was all it's relatively speaking. Mm-hmm. Some of the precipitable water values in the East Pacific, not that far off from where we were in mid-February, were like 2 inches. We're talking like monsoon levels that we would see here in town. We didn't hit that because we don't have the temps couldn't carry that this time of year. But that was a lot of moisture. This storm wasn't anywhere close to that. But again, cold storms don't have a lot of moisture typically. And so when they're able to intersect with any, they're going to be usually efficient precip producers. They're going to be able to convert that into precip.
Yeah. And I mean, just to put some numbers to it, I believe total snowfall on Mount Lemmon, I saw one report of 30 inches.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some of the forecasts were like 40 to 50 coming out of that, right?
Yeah, yep.
And Flagstaff broke its all-time 24-hour snowfall record.
Thursday of that event.
Thursday, okay.
35 inches.
Yeah, that's impressive.
And then I think it's over 2 days or a little over 2 days. It was 40 inches.
40 inches, yeah, which doesn't break some of the all-time state records, which are actually quite a bit more. Right. But for that event,
right? Really for a 24-hour total, 35 inches.
Yeah.
Thereabouts broke the record, and Phoenix received an inch of rainfall, which is, I mean, so it was widespread, and yes, the precipitable water wasn't up there, but it was an efficient system in wringing what was there.
Absolutely, yeah, it was amazing. From low elevation to high elevation to get the snow. It was a great event, and you and I were chatting, and I had completely forgotten about the last February snowfall event, which was in 2013. I can't even remember it. But so Tucson recorded I think what the official total for February was 1.9 inches, and we had 2 inches in 2013. And I can't place that at all.
I remember that event.
You took a bunch of pictures.
Yeah, I remember that event.
I remember. And then prior to that, those are the only 2 February snow events since 1991. So
yeah, it had been a long time.
Right. It's in almost 20 years. We've only seen February snow twice.
Right. And I remember fielding, a few of us were fielding media inquiries, and I was looking at a plot that you made of the snowfall in February, and I came to the conclusion that it's certainly infrequent, but it's not unprecedented.
It's not unprecedented, no. But it's in that historical record. We'll get a trace, every once in a while, but actually that measurable snowfall has since, if we're looking at the International Airport record back to 1948, you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. 2 of them in the last 5 years, but those are only 2 since 1991. It's almost 20 years. So twice in 20 years, just in the last 5.
I think the real point here is that it's just really infrequent that you have cold, wet storms.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, I mean, it snows on Mount Lemmon quite frequently.
Yeah, to get it to elevation, it's kind of that knife edge and that convergence of I think that's a good point. I want to kind of pack that a little bit. Is we very regularly have cold systems come through Tucson or come through the Southwest, right? And one of those measures would be the thickness of the atmosphere. And one of those, you can use that as a forecasting tool to try to assess if you're going to get snowfall or rainfall at the surface on that. So, as I was plotting some of that data in the past, we've got lots of days when it's cold enough for it to snow, and storm systems coming through. There's just no moisture, right? It's like you said, it's that convergence of having that system come through and having the moisture at the right time, and just getting that sort of knife edge of being able to pull that freezing level down to the surface while it's precipitating is why it doesn't happen here very often.
Yeah, the precipitation story is a big one. I want to just contrast this year a little bit with last year, because I think that plays a little bit about how we think about this winter. And
that's right, yeah.
So far, February at the Tucson airport was 2 inches, 2.03 to be precise. That one event that we were just talking about was close to an inch. So for the total, and I'm looking at Mike's graphs here, and that started October 1st, but from October 1 through the end of February, 7.5 inches of rain has fallen at Tucson Airport. Average is around 5. Just to contrast that with last year over that same period, basically at this time last year, we had a little bit over 2 inches. So 5 inches of difference. Now, admittedly, I'm including in October, which is maybe a little bit unfair, but I don't have a figure that it doesn't include October, because October was real.
October's crazy.
Yeah.
Man, let's it's a big hug right now for this year. Like I want the grand winter, let's do the October through as much as we can.
Okay.
Because October was so unprecedented in so many ways too. And it has set up this winter. That to me is where we're going to look at that whole October period through the end of the spring and compare it. And it's, this is an exceptional year.
Right. And so from October 1st through the end of May, on average, Tucson receives 26 precipitation events.
Yeah.
Already, we've received 30.
Yeah, 30. And we had 10 last year. We've had 3. It's rained 3 times as much, just frequency-wise, than it has last year.
We're actually on track. We could be on track. I haven't looked at the data, but we could be on track for record-setting October through May rainfall.
We could, yeah. So right now our precip rank it's the 14th. Wettest.
Does that update, or is
that's the full rank for the whole? Yeah, and it does. So it's taking the total through here. So we got March precip in there, and potentially April. We're getting a little greedy here. At least that's the way I'm kind of feeling now, because Marches haven't been that great
right
in the last couple of years, and neither have Aprils for a long time. So can we keep the run going? Or
that's my question.
Are we going to drift back towards our old bad habits of ending winter early?
We don't have a ton of time left, is what you were just more or less saying.
So March and April, it can rain here. Right. It can even snow, which is crazy.
Right, but we're at this point, we're on the descending limb in terms of chances, if you will. The chances of getting rainfall are diminishing now. And
it's getting warmer. Just historically, the trend is warmer and drier.
But again, spring. I think the big picture here is that, by all accounts, here locally and across the West, it's been a very wet and woolly winter.
Wet and woolly,
yeah. And so I want to talk about the woolly part, because it's also been pretty darn frigid.
Yeah. Frigid. Is this your air quotes again?
Yeah. Frigid.
Yeah, okay, I will give you. I'll give you air quotes on your frigid. Yeah,
from a New Englander, like
quote unquote frigid for sure.
Well, I don't know. I'm like fully acclimatized now. Like I find it like kind of chilly. I don't know. We all probably have different ways of figuring out if it's been cold. Yours probably looks at actual data, but mine's
coats.
Yeah, yours is coats. Yeah. Okay, mine
coats
is like
that I haven't worn in years.
How often my toes freeze in the morning on bike rides.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. And they've been freezing this year.
Yeah, it's been gear. It's been gear that I haven't worn in years has come out and actually been functional. Like I've tried to get out gear in past years and just wear it out of like determination, and you get too hot.
My question is that right? Has it been cold?
Yeah, it's been cold. Yeah, absolutely.
That's it? That's all you got?
Sure, got it. Yeah, it's cold. It's frigid. Because I'm doing my air quotes.
Maybe we can put this in context.
Datafy this?
Yeah. Okay. So since January 1st, if you look at the average temperature in Tucson, it's been 2 inches below 2 inches.
2 inches.
2 inches 2 degrees
of mercury.
Fahrenheit.
Yes.
Below average.
Yeah.
That's been the average of the average. The anomaly for the maximum, the high temperatures, has been 2.5 degrees below average. And the minimums as well. The minimums have been not quite as cold.
That's trend.
And they've been 1.5 degrees below average from the beginning of January. And that's probably held true for February. Actually, it's been colder in February.
Cool. So February is the month when we look at DJF, December, January, February, it's going to drag the whole winter down because it was exceptionally cold. Okay, so exceptionally, what do you think the word exceptionally means?
In percentiles?
Yeah, I think I may have overspoke.
Well, I don't know. We don't need to do the percent.
Well, I think that when we start looking at the data, there's an interesting when we start looking at the gridded data of temperature across the West. There's this very strange pattern to it where New Mexico has been near normal for February and even slightly above in the far southeast part of the state, and there's a gradient across the West. And as you go to Arizona, we're below normal in the bottom third of all February temps. And then the west half of the state is actually the bottom 10%. And this is in the long-term record, so going back to late 1800s to present. So it's not record coldest.
So like in the 10 coldest Februarys.
10%, yeah.
So the
right.
10, it's been one of the 10
If it was 100
coldest,
years, it would have been 10. Yeah, if it was 100 years of record, then it would have been one of the 10 coldest. So, yeah, that stands out. I mean,
so just the last 30 days, so maybe not all of February, but for Tucson, the average temperature has been close to 5 degrees below average. So that's,
that's noticeable, right?
Yeah.
That's toe freezing. That's uncomfortable, Zach. Right there.
I was chilly.
I've been out too, and it's striking. And we've had 14 days of below freezing temperatures at the Tucson airport, and our average is 16.
See, that was striking to me when I saw that. 16
I may have calculated this
on
wrong.
average.
I may have calculated wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's correct.
I don't doubt it. It's just I wouldn't have thought that there would have been that many days below freezing.
I think it's to your point. Maybe we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but the last 5 Februarys have been so exceptionally warm and dry that we have almost completely adapted to that.
I think that's another part of the story. So looking at December, January, and February, the average of those 3 months since 1950, and this year we're a couple degrees below average, but the 5 years preceding that was at least a couple degrees above average.
Yeah.
Psychologically, people likely they recalibrate what they think is normal. Mm-hmm. And in comparison this year to those 5 years, I mean, it's even that temperature difference is even much greater.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, you were pointing this out in a really cool paper that actually looked at people's perceptions of what they thought was unusual weather. And it turns out that basically people recalibrate their what they think their normal conditions are after just like 5 2 to 8 years.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it was like 5 years.
I think it really is. I think a little bit of evidence of that. I mean, February, you get kind of queued up to Super Bowls at the beginning of the month, and then there's like here in Tucson, we've got the school break towards the middle of the month. There's all these like things that you start to like, okay, this is what happens this week. And so for the last couple of years, it's been like shorts and it hasn't rained at all. And so things are blooming in the backyard and spring has come. And so I had switched over. This February comes along and it's colder than average. It really does stand out, and it's been very wet. So it was almost like, wait, does it do this here? Is it really this cold? And then you go back in the records, like, oh yeah, this is totally possible.
Well, yeah, that
quite a bit more normal than what you've actually been experiencing.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's just the last 5 years stick out.
Yeah.
But then if you just take those
last 5 years out, and then
away.
You're like, oh.
And then it's like this year is actually not that different.
No, not right.
In fact, if you go back earlier, let's say 30 years, to the 60s through the 80s, and the temperature difference is much greater than, or the anomaly is much greater than it is. Could you handle that?
This
Could
over
you
and over
handle
again?
living in Tucson in the 60s and 70s? If you think now is cold,
oh, I know,
cold.
Yeah,
air quotes,
okay,
cold.
frigid. Yeah, I think Tucson was frigid at one point. It was in the 60s. That was the decade of the crazy snowstorms in Arizona, very cold temperatures, and then we've got this climate change trend on top of it that is sort of climbing out. So the real question is what will next February be like? We should do a bet.
That's too far out. Let's not forget to revisit. We forgot to revisit our bet in the precipitation segment.
I actually bought gear this winter to do stuff outside that will come in super handy if February does this again. But I don't know, man. It's probably this is the anomaly, and the last 5 are we shifting more towards that? That's really sad.
Yeah. If people are interested, that paper that I was referring to is in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences,
which everybody gets. I think.
Yeah. Oh, that's people get that delivered to their houses.
You know that stack of coupons that you get with all the
comes in with it's the National Geographic.
Yeah, exactly. The AAAS. Yeah, right.
But I just want to have a fine point on that. The point that they were trying to make in the paper was that people might not actually experience or perceive climate change because there's this slow creep in changing temperatures, right? It's getting, I think the trend is anywhere between a 1/10 of a degree per 10 years up to, depending on where you are, maybe a 1/2 degree per 10 years. I mean, that's slow. And if people are resetting what they think is normal every 2 to 8 years, it's really hard to detect that kind of a change.
Absolutely.
And it works in reverse for us here.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, and it's when we swing, it's actually interesting even outside of the climate change discussion, but the decadal variability of us sort of shifting towards dealing with drought, really getting tuned up on that. We also have a wet side of the Arizona equation, which is the flooding and that kind of stuff. So, there's some evidence, I don't know if it's quantified, but I certainly had this in discussions of moving in this direction, getting all tuned up on drought, forgetting about the wet side and how to deal with the wet side. And then you spend a whole decade as you're getting wetter dealing with the flood side, and then you forget about the drought side again. So I figure as Arizona, the decadal variability of droughts and longer-term pluvials is expected to continue here, drying and sort of shrinking in that winter season. But I think on average, there will be wetter periods in the future. That'll be the dicey part is coming out of those because we'll have completely forgotten about the drought side, which we've gotten tuned up on here as it's getting warmer on top of all that. So a lot of challenges in keeping this sort of climate perspective going, which is what we're here for, right?
Yeah. Exactly. No, I think that's a good point. I mean, particularly in the context of perceptions being shaped by recent memory and the psychology of that, I think the role that you play, Mike, is a good one. And it's like let's not forget about the longer term record. And let's put this cold spell within its proper context. Right. Cold spell, air quotes. Because it's not all that unprecedented. It is in the last 6 years, but that's a pretty short memory.
It's a pretty short memory. Yeah, we've actually had a handful of above average days in the same month that we had 6 freezing events and snow at the airport.
And those swings are not unrelated to the precipitation.
Yeah, it's the weather pattern across the West. It's been up and down. We have not parked in anything exception. It's like not new weather that we've never experienced.
All right, let's jump back really quickly before going to snowpack. And that is, since we already talked about precipitation, we should just update everybody on where we stand with our January, February, March bets. I know you're rolling your eyes. Well, February coming in at a little bit over 2 inches, obviously was so much higher than both your and my estimates.
Climatology really let us down.
Yeah, climatology for February for Tucson was 0.86 inches. Mike, you were close to climatology at 1 inch. I was actually closer to climatology at 3/4 of an inch. And, of course, 2 inches comes in. So that's more than, 200% of average. You look at our totals, Mike, you had 2.8 inches for the 3 months, January, February, March. And I had 2.9. And right now we're at 3.12. So
it's already, it's totally blown. Ben was trying to, I think, throw me a bone and seeing if we could win by month, and I appreciated that, but I don't think there's any way.
It's hard to feel good about this victory though, because we were both so wrong with February.
Yeah,
and
I mean, and it's so wrong in such a good way, right? Okay. I mean, that's awesome. 2 inches, precip. That's. But I'm looking at my March
4th and 5th. On record. All right. So you estimated 0.3 inches and I was bullish at 0.9.
You were bullish at 0.9. Yeah. If I nail 0.3 for March, I'm going to get a consolation prize.
Let's talk very quickly. We've sort of already preluded this with the talk of precipitation, but I think it's worthwhile to highlight snowpack across the West. It's been a very, very rosy picture for much of the West. That obviously mirrors the precipitation pattern that you were first describing. The only high country areas that are showing signs of below average snowpack happens to be in Arizona and New Mexico and the Pacific Northwest, far northern areas in Washington, really, and maybe a little bit in Idaho and Montana. Everything else is above average, some greater than 200% of average, particularly in the Sierras, which we talked about. My feeling on this is if you were to average across the entire West, the snowpack across the entire West, that this would be a top 10, maybe a top 5 winter.
Absolutely. Yes.
That's it. Huh?
Did you want me to push back on that?
I did. I thought I was going to say something controversial.
Nah.
You're going to be like, I was looking at the data and...
It just looks good. It looks good everywhere. Okay. Arizona's not that bad. You're kind of dishing on Arizona.
Well, what about
snowpack. Our snowpack's never that good.
Yeah, our snowpack is not that
our highest elevation peaks are doing fine right now.
It's really the White Mountains, though.
Yeah, I know, but it's actually March, and so it's late in the season, and I think they're nibbling around the edges.
So I was looking in Baldy at the Snowtel site at Baldy, which is in the White Mountains.
Yep.
Its snow water equivalent is above.
Yeah. It's above median.
Above the median.
Yeah, and the precip is quite a bit above median for this time of year. It's at about 15 inches of total precip, and the median would be 12. So it's a couple inches above. I'm not feeling that bad about it. Talked to some folks. Salt River Project is very pleased. There's water. There's going to be water running in the Verde, in the salts, and all over the place. We've had a consistent flow in the Rito for a couple of weeks now. So you don't see that every year. You can't call this year good in Arizona. What do you want?
I agree. I mean, I was trying to not paint a completely rosy picture, but it's kind of hard
for you.
It's kind of hard not to. No, but to your point about the Salt River Basin, looking at the basin average at the end of February, the snow water equivalent is 220% of average.
Yeah.
Last year, it was 87% of average. Yeah. So again, that juxtaposes the difference.
Serious whiplash from
and then,
this year to last.
When you look at the water year in the Salt River Basin, it's close to 120% of average, whereas last year it was around 30% of average. So again, just such a contrast. And, I can go down to all of the river basins, the Verde River Basin, the San Francisco Peaks, the Little Colorado. That is the same pattern. I mean, the numbers change a little bit, but hugely above average right now and much greater than it was last year. Hugely.
Yeah,
Bigly.
I'm with you. Hugely. I'm so with you on that.
Is that not a word?
I'm not sure, but I'm going to use it. I think the watersheds in the Colorado River are looking pretty good. Some are looking really, really good. Northern New Mexico, it's pretty close to average for this time of year.
Right.
So again, New Mexico hasn't seen quite the same winter that we've seen over here. So I don't want to forget.
Right.
That's been the case.
We'll take it, I think. And I think it bodes well for drought moderation and at least in the upcoming fire season, if the snowpack can stay on the landscape a little bit longer, it'll certainly shorten the season a little bit. Well, it may actually add to risk.
Lower elevations are going to definitely be flush
in future years as the precip helps build up, fuels and whatnot. But at least next year, maybe it gives us a little indication that fire season will be less risky.
So there's been a couple of discussions on some online listservs that I'm on, Drought Monitor in particular. There's so much cautious optimism with what's going on because it's March. And we have seen years in the past where it just stops, the accumulations just stop, and it gets warm. And
right.
You
it's that increasing, rapidly increasing temperatures.
March
that's going to be
snow eaters can definitely happen. So kind of hanging out here. Like if this was the end of April and we had done this all and it was like, okay, we're all like, pack it in, winter's over. Let's get on with this and go on to spring and that kind of stuff. Actually, the CPC forecast is leaning a little bit above average. That's probably trend, but it's not as solid as we've seen it in past. So get through March.
Well,
we get into April. I'm going to feel a little better.
Is there any patterns with an El Niño and rapidly warming or warmer springs?
Nah, probably nothing that's all that significant. If you look at some of the correlation patterns in springtime weather patterns and El Niños, and usually when they're a little more solid and warmer than that, stuff can stay unsettled. And you can end up having these systems sort of drag in here. But
that would sort of argue for more cooler conditions and wetter conditions.
Yeah, maybe wetter. Yeah, maybe a little bit wetter. I think if it was a La Niña, then we would have called it, right? We would have been like, okay,
it's summer already.
Yeah, heck yeah. I mean, if it was a La Niña and it was March, I'd be talking about the monsoon today. Like I'd be like, well, I don't know. I'm gonna go out and polish my rain gauge and see, wait for June, 15th to show up. So I don't know. I still think there's some interesting stuff potentially could waft in here in the next couple of months. Maybe it won't totally crash and burn. Honestly, it's like we have no idea. But I think the fact that it's not La Niña maybe lends some hope. And the CPC forecasts are actually, they're kind of shruggy right now, even a little bit wet at some of the different timescales.
All right. So the bet then is over under.
Ooh.
Top 8 precip.
Wait,
October
what?
Through the end of May.
Oh, so we got it.
So we're at 14 right now for Tucson.
Okay.
Over under, like, will we be above the 8th wettest, or somewhere between the 8th and the 14th wettest? I have no idea.
I'm taking the under. I'm so pessimistic.
Well, the 3-month forecast from CPC is actually slightly optimistic about increased chances that rainfall will be in the upper tercile of the climatological record.
I love it when you talk that way. Yeah.
No, I'm going to go the over because I was bullish, and I'm sticking with the bullish on March precipitation.
I think I'm going to get burned on this one, but I'm going with the under. Okay, so you're going to say we're going to be in the top 8 wettest October through May 31st for Tucson. I'm going to say we're going to
You're somewhere between the 14th and
8th and 14th.
In real time, we do have some numbers. So to become a top 8 winter rain season, there needs to be at the Tucson airport, get this, 1.78 inches of rain. That's not going to happen.
Boom! So it's happened.
So 1.78 inches needs to fall from now until the end of May for me to win that bet.
In 1978, we did it. We got to 9.33 inches. And then it goes on up from there. So the wettest October 1st through May 31st at Tucson was almost 11 inches in 1993.
Yeah, but the question is how many more inches fell from this point to the end of May?
I don't know.
Yeah,
Let's
so
figure that out.
We'll figure that out offline.
Yeah.
Or can you do that?
I could do it right now.
There has been 12 years in the... When does this record go back?
So this would be out of what? 60 something? 72 years.
72 years. So 12 out of 72 has actually seen more than 1.78 inches in the period from now until the end of May. 12 years out of 72. Ah, man, I do not like those odds, but it's not zero.
It's not zero. So the last time that happened was in 2004, which is kind of interesting. We had 2 inches between the beginning of March and the end of May.
Yep.
And that's
2004, baby. That's my mantra. Bring on 2004. Let's quickly talk about El Niño, because it is, by some measures, finally here. And that kind of pains me to say a little bit, because in terms of sea surface temperatures, we've definitely past peak sea surface temperatures. But the reason why NOAA has said it's finally here, and they said that in mid-February, is because the atmosphere finally sort of became in lockstep with the sea surface temperature. So it was behaving both from a sea perspective and an atmosphere perspective like an El Niño.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it, huh?
Yeah. So over El Niño.
Yeah.
El Niño skates in at the end. Everybody's going to give it all credit for being a wet winter. I'm just not, I don't know.
There was the long arms of El Niño did not have its hands in any of the February or January or storms that we've talked about?
Not really. Okay, so what can we give El Nino credit for this winter?
Go. Because you did
news coverage.
You did mention though that there had been split a jet stream, which
so El Nino's presence in the Pacific Ocean has been not that great. I mean, and that was the whole atmospheric coupling. Was that did we see any real big shifts in atmospheric moisture, and primarily was it in the precipitation pattern across the Pacific? There was above average precipitation kind of hugging the dateline more towards the west of the dateline. And we had the warm water that was much further east than that, but you weren't seeing the weather sort of follow that. And we ended up having a lot of pretty strong Madden-Julian oscillations move across the globe a couple of times, which really did seem to be the mechanism that was pushing the changes in the jet stream pattern. And then all this moisture in the East Pacific sort of aligning with it. And
that's kind of interesting because the presence and frequency of those MJOs, Madden-Julian oscillations, are actually, they happen more when there isn't an El Nino.
That's right. Yeah. You need some easterly wind to actually propagate into to have it move around. So you can't have both kind of.
Right.
I mean, so there were times when the discussions were talking about the Madden-Julian oscillation constructively and destructively interfering with the base state of El Nino. And it wasn't until we got into sort of late February that you started to see this mass of disturbed weather and clouds and what we call outgoing long radiation being below average hang out at the kind of the dateline and slightly to the east. It seemed to be the evidence that there was coupling at that point. And it could have been actually kickstarted by earlier MJO activity and then these two things constructively interfering with each other. So all kind of comes together at the end of February.
You have a 3-month average for sea surface temperatures. And for it to be an El Nino, 5 consecutive 3-month averages have to be over 0.5 degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius?
Celsius.
In a particular region in the tropical Pacific Ocean. Wow.
Great.
That's how, that's science.
You didn't make it. You didn't make the definition, right?
But if anybody's making decisions in October about seasonal totals and they saw that forecast, the forecast would have been right.
Yeah. How
do you feel about that?
Well,
do you have to
get it right for the right reason?
Yeah.
I'm a climatologist. That's not what we do. I think we were communicating the expectation that it was going to be a weak event, so our confidence wasn't great. And CPC really, I don't think oversold this either. I think that the forecasts were hedging a lot and we're kind of leaning. It's just, I think we all get frustrated when we get to the end of the season and it goes in the win column and you're just like, I guess.
It makes you think about the statistical
that's
associations that are produced from these El Ninos.
Yeah, right.
It's like, well, does that really count?
Right.
Moving forward, there is still some evidence that El Nino will reform next winter.
Double dip, really?
Double dip.
Interesting.
But
okay.
What is actually interesting is that those odds, or the confidence in that is decreasing. At least it decreased slightly from last month. It was a little bit bullish. I think like El Nino had like a 50% chance of being present in the winter of 2019-2020, and it dipped a little bit this month. There's some evidence that there's warm subsurface temperatures in the tropical Pacific Ocean, which may, when they surface, will bump up the El Nino, and so it might persist via that. But I did find it interesting that they've sort of they're decreasing their confidence a little bit in a double dip.
I feel like a lot of hedging just happens this time of the year anyways. Since there wasn't a real efficient movement of a lot of the warm water from the West Pacific to the East Pacific, in that whole, what do they call it, the delayed oscillator idea where you're charging up the battery and you pulse it out. This one has been kind of a slow leak. I think it leaves a lot of potential for that stuff to kind of come out.
We're getting into that month where it's really difficult to project El Nino, as you mentioned before, the spring predictability barrier. So we'll just leave that to the next month. We'll talk about it
Fair enough.
In a month. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And we'll come back in another month and waste more of your time.
Cheers, everybody. So we're calling it the best winter since last winter edition
It's
of
the
the podcast. We workshopped that a little bit.
The best. Yeah, that went over well. The best winter since last winter. I don't know what those numbers are. Maybe Ben can quickly pull that up. Maybe not. I just got the stink eye.